A grand ballroom bathed in golden light, crystal glasses clinking like distant chimes, and 100 eyes waiting for the next scene to unfold. She walks in, elegant, untouchable, her emerald gown slicing through the whispers like a blade. But across the room, a man watches with a smirk, certain he's about to ruin her night. He's armed with secrets, with a plan to drag her back into the shadows of her past. What he doesn't know is that the woman standing before him has already walked through fire and learned how to make it light her way. Before this night ends, reputations will shatter, truths will erupt like thunder, and the quiet power she carries will turn the entire room against him. And it all begins with a single, unexpected smile. The grand hall of the Belmont Country Club shimmered with chandeliers and polished marble floors. Glasses clinked, laughter rippled, and the scent of roses drifted in the air. It was the night of the annual high school alumni reunion, a night for old classmates to mingle, boast, and quietly measure who had aged better, who had fallen, and who had climbed to dizzying heights. At the center of it all was Ryan Mallory. Tall, broad-shouldered, his tailored charcoal suit hugged him like a second skin. His watch gleamed under the lights, a Patek Philippe worth more than most people's cars. On his arm was a woman who seemed designed to be photographed, Alyssa Crane. Blonde waves, scarlet lipstick, a dress that hugged her like liquid metal. Her laugh rang just loud enough to turn heads, and every time she touched Ryan's arm, she made sure someone was watching. Ryan's eyes scanned the crowd, searching for one face, his ex-wife, Claire Bennett. The thought of her arriving alone, wearing one of her sensible dresses and looking as ordinary as ever, made his lips curl in anticipation. Tonight wasn't just about seeing old friends. It was about showing Claire, and everyone else, that he had upgraded. Claire had been the quiet one back in school. Sweet, bookish, always with a stack of novels under her arm. When they married at 25, she had been working as a small-town librarian, living modestly, dreaming small. Ryan had been her opposite. Ambitious, social, always chasing the next big thing. For a while, it had worked. Then his hunger for more, for flash, for recognition, had left her behind. The divorce had been brutal. Ryan had walked away with the apartment, most of the savings, and his pride intact. Claire, as far as he knew, had slunk off to a rented place and a quiet, predictable life. The idea of her still pining for him had fed his ego for years. Tonight, he planned to seal that narrative. He and Alyssa would walk in, hand in hand, and Claire would see exactly what she had lost. He pictured her smile faltering, her eyes darting away, maybe even leaving early. That thought alone had made him pay extra for Alyssa's designer gown. By the time Ryan and Alyssa entered the ballroom, whispers had already started. Is that his new girlfriend? Wow, she's stunning. Poor Claire. The music swelled, and Ryan grinned, guiding Alyssa toward the center of the room, like a king entering his court. Near the buffet table, he finally spotted her. Claire. At first, he thought his memory was playing tricks on him. The woman standing there, chatting with two people he didn't recognize, looked different. Gone was the shy, slouched posture. She stood tall, shoulders back, her dark hair swept into a sleek updo that revealed the graceful line of her neck. Her dress, a floor-length emerald silk, caught the light with every movement, subtle yet impossible to ignore. Ryan blinked, trying to reconcile this woman with the one he'd once known. Alyssa followed his gaze, then smirked. That's her, isn't it? The ex? She whispered, her tone dripping with superiority. Yeah, Ryan muttered, forcing a smirk. Just wait. She's still the same underneath. They approached slowly, Ryan rehearsing in his mind the perfect mix of smugness and pity for his greeting. But before he could speak, Claire turned, and the world seemed to shift. Her eyes met his without flinching, and for the briefest second, something like amusement flickered in them. Beside her, a man stepped forward. He was tall, broad, with the kind of presence that made space without trying. His black tuxedo was perfectly tailored, his cufflinks understated yet unmistakably expensive. And when he placed a hand lightly on Claire's back, it wasn't the casual touch of a date, it was the claim of someone who belonged there. Ryan, Claire said smoothly, her voice carrying just enough warmth to be polite. This is Nathan Cole. She didn't add anything else, but the name hit Ryan like a sudden drop in temperature. Nathan Cole. The Nathan Cole, CEO of Cole International Holdings. A man whose photo had been on the cover of Forbes twice in the last year. A man who could buy and sell Ryan's entire company without noticing the dent in his account. Nathan extended a hand, his grip firm but not aggressive. "Nice to meet you. Claire's told me some stories." Ryan forced a chuckle. "All good, I hope." Nathan smiled faintly. "Let's just say, enlightening." Alyssa shifted beside Ryan, her earlier confidence faltering. She recognized Nathan too. Everyone did. She plastered on a smile, but Nathan's eyes didn't linger on her. They were back on Claire, softening in a way that made Ryan's stomach twist. The conversation moved on, but Ryan barely heard it. His plan for the night, the smug reveal, the subtle humiliation, was unraveling before his eyes. This wasn't the Claire he remembered. This was someone else entirely. Someone who belonged in Nathan Cole's world, who could stand in a room like this and not just hold her own, but shine. The room suddenly felt warmer, the lights harsher. Ryan's hand tightened on his champagne glass. He needed to regain control, to remind everyone who he was. He leaned toward Claire, his voice low. "Didn't expect to see you here. Last I heard, you were keeping things simple." Claire tilted her head, her smile never wavering. "Life changes, Ryan, sometimes for the better." Nathan's hand rested lightly on hers, and something in that small gesture made Ryan's jaw clench. The rest of the room seemed to fade into a blur of glittering dresses and murmured conversations. This wasn't the reunion he had imagined. It was a challenge, and Ryan Mallory had never been good at losing. But as Nathan leaned closer to whisper something in Claire's ear, Ryan noticed the way her eyes lit up and realized with a jolt that the game he thought he was playing might already be over. Long before the dazzling emerald gown, before the quiet confidence that made heads turn, Claire Bennett was simply invisible. She had grown up in Brooksville, a sleepy suburb where nothing much happened except Friday night football games and the occasional new diner opening. Her parents ran a small flower shop, and Claire spent most of her teenage years helping out, wrapping roses, watering orchids, sweeping petals off the counter. It wasn't glamorous, but it was safe. After college, she landed her first real job as a librarian in town. The pay wasn't much, but she loved the quiet rhythm of the work, the smell of old pages, the satisfying click of a stamp on a due date card, the way children's faces lit up when she found the perfect story for them. That was when she met Ryan Mallory. He had swagger even then, though not the expensive kind. At 27, Ryan was working as a junior sales associate for a tech distributor. He came into the library one rainy afternoon to use the free Wi-Fi, claiming his home internet was down. Claire, who'd seen him around town, offered him a seat and a cup of coffee from the staff lounge. From that day on, he kept finding reasons to stop by. He'd bring her lunch, help carry heavy boxes, and tell her about his big plans to leave small-town life behind. He called her Sunshine, said she was the only one who believed in him. And she did. They married within a year. Claire thought she'd found her partner, someone to build a life with. She didn't care that he wasn't wealthy or powerful. She loved his ambition, his energy, the way he could make her laugh after the longest day. But ambition, she learned, could be a double-edged sword. After Ryan got promoted and they moved to the city, things changed. He wanted nicer suits, flashier restaurants, and a bigger apartment they couldn't really afford. When Claire suggested waiting until they were more stable, he brushed her off. "You don't understand how things work in this world," he'd say. "You've got to look like you belong before you actually do." At first, she tried to keep up, working extra hours, cutting corners on groceries, skipping her own needs to make sure Ryan had what he wanted. But nothing was ever enough. If she bought a new dress, he'd call it cute, but point out how much better Alyssa from his office dressed. If she made dinner, he'd eat distractedly while scrolling through his phone. And then came the late nights at work. The networking events she wasn't invited to. The whiff of unfamiliar perfume on his suit. Claire's breaking point came one icy December evening. She'd spent hours cooking a special anniversary dinner, his favorite roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, and the chocolate souffle he'd once said reminded him of their honeymoon. Ryan didn't come home until nearly midnight, slightly drunk, lipstick smudged on his collar. When she confronted him, he laughed. "Don't be dramatic, Claire. You knew what you were signing up for." 3 months later, the divorce papers were on the table. Ryan made sure the settlement favored him, arguing she hadn't contributed financially enough to deserve more. She walked away with a small savings account, a few pieces of furniture, and the lingering sting of betrayal. For a while, she really did disappear. She rented a tiny apartment in a quieter part of the city, took a part-time job at a second-hand bookstore, and kept to herself. The friends she'd made through Ryan drifted away. Loyalty in his circle was based on power, and she no longer had any. It was during one of those long, lonely shifts at the bookstore that her life took an unexpected turn. A man came in looking for a rare first edition of The Great Gatsby. He was tall, with dark hair flecked with silver, and he moved with the kind of calm that made the world seem to slow around him. When Claire regretfully told him they didn't have it, he smiled. "That's all right. I've been looking for it for years. One more day won't hurt." They ended up talking for nearly an hour. His name was Nathan Cole. She didn't know it then, but he was one of the most influential CEOs in the country. That night he left with a different book, The Count of Monte Cristo. "A story about revenge and redemption," he said with a wink. Nathan came back a week later, then again the week after that. Sometimes he bought books, sometimes he just talked. Claire found herself telling him things she hadn't told anyone. The way Ryan had chipped at her confidence, the fear she'd never be more than the ex-wife who failed. One rainy afternoon, Nathan said something she never forgot. "You don't have to be the person they remember. You can be whoever you decide to be now." That was the spark. Nathan didn't swoop in and save her. Claire wouldn't have allowed it. But he gave her opportunities, an introduction to a friend in the publishing industry, advice on managing her savings, encouragement to take courses in business and marketing. Slowly, she began to rebuild, not just her career, but herself. Within 2 years, she had launched a small but thriving online business, curating and selling rare books to collectors. She dressed differently, not for anyone else, but for herself. She traveled, learned, and stopped apologizing for taking up space. By the time Nathan asked her to accompany him to the alumni reunion, she hesitated. Not because she was afraid, but because she wasn't sure if she cared about the people there anymore. But then she thought of Ryan, of the smirk he'd worn the day they signed the divorce papers, of how certain he had been that she would fade away. No, she told N, she didn't need revenge to validate her worth. But a little poetic justice? That was another matter entirely. When the night of the reunion came, Claire stood in front of her mirror, the emerald silk gown hugging her in all the right places. Her makeup was subtle but flawless, her hair a sleek crown of confidence. She felt untouchable. Nathan appeared in the doorway, his gaze warm and approving. "Ready?" Claire took one last look at herself, at the woman who had survived betrayal, loneliness, and the slow erosion of her self-worth, and had come out stronger. She picked up her clutch, slipped her arm through Nathan's, and smiled. "Let's make an entrance." And somewhere across town, Ryan Mallory was already rehearsing the smug lines he'd never get the chance to deliver. The hum of conversation at the Belmont Country Club was like a living thing, constant, shifting, buzzing under the clink of champagne flutes and the occasional burst of laughter. Old classmates swapped exaggerated stories about careers, vacations, and children's college acceptances. But as Claire and Nathan entered, the tone in the room shifted. It wasn't just that she looked different. It was the way she carried herself. Head high, shoulders back, eyes scanning the room with calm assurance. She wasn't the shy librarian from years ago. She was a woman who could walk into a room full of people waiting to judge her and still own it. They had barely crossed the threshold before whispers started weaving through the crowd. "Is that Claire Bennett? She looks incredible. Who's the guy with her?" Ryan, positioned near the center of the ballroom like he was holding court, spotted her almost instantly. His smirk tightened into something more forced as he noticed the way heads turned in her direction. Alyssa's hand on his arm became a little more possessive. Claire caught his gaze and smiled politely. Nothing overdone, nothing theatrical, just enough to signal that she wasn't avoiding him. Nathan's palm pressed lightly at the small of her back as they moved toward the bar. They didn't make it far. "Claire!" Ryan's voice cut through the hum, loud enough to draw nearby attention. "Well, this is unexpected." She turned, her smile still in place. "Ryan, Alyssa leaned into Ryan's side, her lips curling into something meant to be sweet but edged with steel. You didn't mention your ex was coming. Ryan's chuckle was just a shade too loud. Oh, I didn't think she'd want to mingle. He let the pause hang in the air, as if inviting the crowd to fill it with their own assumptions. Nathan's gaze flicked to Ryan, his expression unreadable. Why wouldn't she? He asked casually. Ryan shrugged, his tone dipping into condescension. Well, you know, reunions can be awkward for some people, especially when they've simplified their lifestyle. Claire's smile didn't falter, but she could feel the heat of curious eyes on her. She took a slow sip of champagne before answering. Simplified doesn't mean diminished, Ryan. It just means you focus on what actually matters. That landed more sharply than Ryan had expected, judging by the flicker in his expression. Alyssa gave a short, brittle laugh, trying to smooth the moment. Well, I suppose everyone measures success differently. Nathan's voice was calm, but it carried weight. True, for some, it's about what they can acquire. For others, it's about what they can build. There was a subtle shift in the circle around them. People leaned in just a little closer. This wasn't small talk anymore. It was a duel wrapped in polite conversation. Ryan straightened his jacket, forcing a grin. And what do you build, Mr. Cole? Nathan's eyes didn't leave Ryan's. A future worth being proud of. He turned slightly toward Claire. With people who value more than appearances. Claire felt a ripple move through the group. Some recognized Nathan's name now, others were clearly searching their memories for it. Either way, the tide was changing. Ryan tried to steer it back. Well, I'm glad you've found someone to keep you company, Claire. It must make things easier. The implication was clear, and more than a few people caught it. Claire could have let it slide, but she'd spent years swallowing comments like that, letting them settle like stones in her chest. Not tonight. She tilted her head, her voice light, but her words deliberate. Easier? No. More fulfilling? Absolutely. And not because of who Nathan is, but because of how he treats me, which, if memory serves, was never your strong suit. The air between them tightened. A couple of people coughed softly, the social equivalent of stepping back from a brewing storm. Alyssa's smile had gone brittle, and Ryan's jaw ticked. Nathan glanced toward the stage where the reunion committee was setting up for speeches. Shall we find our seats, Claire? She nodded, but as they moved past Ryan, she paused. Oh, Ryan? He turned, the smirk back but thinner now. It's good to see you doing well, she said, her tone cordial. Truly, I hope you're exactly where you wanted to be. The words were polite on the surface, but they carried an undertone Ryan couldn't quite pin down, and that unsettled him more than outright hostility would have. As she and Nathan walked away, Ryan caught fragments of murmured conversations. She's changed so much. That guy's Nathan Cole, isn't it? Wow, she really traded up. His chest tightened, and for the first time all night, the glass of champagne in his hand didn't taste quite as sweet. They took seats near the front, close enough to the stage to hear the committee chair call for everyone's attention. Ryan and Alyssa were a few tables away, still the picture of a glamorous couple, at least to anyone who wasn't watching closely. But Claire wasn't looking for public validation anymore. She was here to live her truth, not to perform for Ryan. Still, she couldn't deny the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the man who had once thought she'd crumble was now the one fidgeting under the spotlight. The speeches began. Light-hearted anecdotes from former classmates, a slideshow of old photos that drew bursts of laughter. Then came the awards. Most successful, most traveled, best glow-up. Claire's name wasn't on the program for any of them, but when the slide for biggest career transformation flashed onto the screen, there she was, a photo of her from 10 years ago, shoulders hunched, cardigan buttoned up to her chin, next to a recent press photo taken at a publishing industry event where she'd been honored for her business achievements. The contrast was undeniable. Gasps rippled through the room, followed by applause. Even people who didn't know her well could see the difference. Claire stood, offering a gracious smile as she accepted the small trophy. "Thank you," she said simply into the microphone. "Sometimes the hardest changes are the ones that turn out to be the best for us." Her gaze swept briefly over the crowd, landing for a heartbeat on Ryan. He was clapping because he had to, but the look in his eyes was something far less celebratory. As she returned to her seat, Nathan leaned in. You didn't just win an award, he murmured. You took the stage. She smiled, setting the trophy on the table. Maybe, but the night's still young. And somewhere in the back of the room, Ryan was starting to realize that the woman he came to humiliate might just be the one writing the story tonight. The applause from Claire's award had barely died down before the chatter resumed, but Ryan wasn't listening to any of it. The sound in his head was a low, steady drumbeat of disbelief and irritation. She had stolen the attention that was supposed to be his tonight. From the corner of his eye, he watched her at the front table, laughing softly at something Nathan said, her hand brushing the side of her wine glass. She didn't look nervous or self-conscious, not even a little. She looked like she belonged there more than anyone else, and that unsettled him in ways he didn't want to admit. When the committee announced a short intermission before dessert, Ryan took his chance. He excused himself from Alyssa's side, telling her he was going to grab some fresh air, and made a slow, deliberate walk toward Claire's table. Nathan had stepped away to greet someone near the bar, leaving Claire momentarily alone. She noticed Ryan approaching before he reached her, her expression neutral, but her posture straightening ever so slightly. "Mind if we talk?" he asked, his voice low enough to suggest this wasn't just casual catching up. She considered for a beat, then nodded. "All right." They stepped into the corridor just outside the ballroom. It was quieter here, the muted hum of the party drifting through the half-open doors. The light from the sconces painted a warm glow along the cream-colored walls. Ryan turned to face her, shoving his hands into his pockets. "You've changed." "I have," she said simply. He studied her face for a moment, searching for cracks, some sign that this new confidence was just a facade. "I wasn't expecting you to be here tonight, let alone." He trailed off, gesturing vaguely toward the ballroom. "Whatever this is." Claire's brow arched. "Whatever what is?" "This act." He smirked, but it didn't quite land. The gown, the CEO boyfriend, the whole power couple image. That's not the Claire I knew. She tilted her head slightly, her voice calm. "Maybe that's because the Claire you knew never had the space to become herself." The words landed sharper than she expected, and for a moment, Ryan's jaw tightened. "I gave you a good life," he said, his tone defensive. "You gave me a life that worked for you," she replied evenly. "Not for me." Ryan scoffed, leaning against the wall. "So what? You're just going to pretend the years we spent together meant nothing?" "They meant something," she said. "They taught me what I will and won't accept. They taught me that being invisible to someone who's supposed to see you is worse than being alone." He flinched, just barely, but enough for her to notice. Ryan tried to shift the subject. "Look, I'm not here to argue about the past. I want to understand how you went from working at a bookstore to being on Nathan Cole's arm at the reunion like you own the place." Claire's lips curved into a small smile. "I stopped waiting for someone to hand me a better life. I built one myself." Her words hung between them, weighted and steady. Ryan gave a short laugh, but it was thin. "And you expect me to believe this is all real? That you're not just, what? Playing a role for him?" Claire's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in something far more dangerous: clarity. "Ryan, the difference between you and Nathan is simple. You needed someone to make you look good. Nathan wants someone who feels good to be with, and there's nothing I'm doing now that I couldn't have done before. If I'd had the right person beside me." The silence stretched. The distant sound of clinking glasses from the ballroom filled the space between their words. Ryan shifted his weight, his confidence fraying. "So this is it? You just moved on, just like that?" "Not just like that," she said softly. "It took time, and work, and letting go of the idea that I needed your approval to be worth anything." For the first time that evening, Ryan didn't have a comeback ready. He just looked at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or the faint realization that the woman in front of him was no longer his to define. Claire stepped back toward the ballroom doors. "We should get back. I wouldn't want Alyssa to wonder where you've gone." Her tone was polite, but the message beneath it was razor sharp. She turned and walked away, the soft rustle of her gown fading into the hum of the reunion. Ryan stayed in the hallway for a moment longer, staring at the closed doors. He told himself he'd come out here to get answers, but all he'd left with was a gnawing feeling he couldn't shake. like the ground had shifted beneath him, and he didn't know how to stand steady anymore. When he returned to the ballroom, Alyssa was mid-conversation with a group of women who were clearly more interested in stealing glances at Claire and Nathan than listening to her stories. Ryan forced a smile, slid an arm around her waist, and tried to ignore the hollow sensation in his chest. From across the room, Claire caught his eye briefly. There was no malice in her expression, no gloating, just a calm, self-assured presence that said she didn't need to win some invisible battle. She'd already moved beyond it. Nathan leaned in to say something to her, and she laughed, an easy, unforced sound that made Ryan's grip on his champagne glass tighten. As the dessert course began, the committee chair took the stage again to announce a charity auction. Nathan was one of the first to raise his paddle, pledging an amount that drew a murmur from the crowd. It wasn't just generosity, it was a statement, and the way Claire's hand rested on his arm afterward made it clear she was proud of it. Ryan told himself it didn't bother him, that it was just money. But deep down, he knew it wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that she'd found someone who valued her in ways he never had. Alyssa whispered something in his ear, pulling him back into the conversation at their table, but his mind wasn't on her words. He was replaying every moment of that hallway exchange, every answer Claire had given him that he couldn't twist or dismiss. For the first time since their divorce, Ryan felt something he couldn't dress up or bury under charm. He felt small, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a question began to form, a question he wasn't ready to face. What if letting her go was the biggest mistake he'd ever made? The charity auction rolled on with smooth efficiency, paddles lifting as bids climbed higher and higher. A weekend in Napa Valley went for $15,000. Courtside tickets to the Knicks fetched $10,000. Then came the crown jewel, a private dinner prepared by a Michelin-starred chef with proceeds going to fund scholarships for underprivileged students. "Let's start the bidding at $20,000, the auctioneer called. Nathan raised his paddle without hesitation. "50," he said, his voice carrying just enough for nearby tables to hear. Heads turned. Even the auctioneer blinked before regaining composure. "50,000, thank you, sir. Do I hear 55? Ryan felt his jaw tighten. He glanced at Alyssa, who offered an encouraging smile. "Go for it," she whispered, her tone sugar-coated but laced with challenge. 60, Ryan said loudly, leaning back in his chair as if the number meant nothing to him. A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. Nathan didn't flinch. He raised his paddle again. 75. Ryan could feel eyes darting between them, old classmates, former colleagues, even a few teachers from their school days. This wasn't just an auction anymore. It was a contest. 100, Ryan declared, his voice firm, almost daring Nathan to top it. Nathan didn't even glance at him. He looked at Claire instead, and she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Nathan lifted his paddle. 200. Gasps broke out across the ballroom. Even the auctioneer took a moment before calling it. 200,000. Going once, going twice, sold to Mr. Cole. Polite applause followed, but the shift in the room was unmistakable. This wasn't a flashy stunt. It was a statement. Nathan had outbid Ryan with ease, and he'd done it without breaking a sweat. Claire leaned toward Nathan, whispering something that made him smile. Ryan, on the other hand, could feel heat crawling up his neck. He'd meant to show off, to prove he could match whatever Claire's new man brought to the table. Instead, he'd been crushed in front of half their graduating class. He needed to regain control, and fast. When the auction ended and people began mingling again, Ryan made his move. The committee chair was preparing to invite alumni to the stage for a few light-hearted speeches, and Ryan sidled up to him. "Mind if I say a few words?" he asked, flashing his most charming smile. Minutes later, Ryan was at the microphone, his voice booming through the speakers. "Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to take a moment to thank the reunion committee for putting together such a beautiful event. It's been amazing to see so many familiar faces and some surprising transformations." A polite laugh rippled through the crowd, though it was tinged with curiosity. Ryan's eyes found Claire in the front row. "It's funny how life works out, isn't it? Back in the day, some of us never imagined we'd end up where we are now. Some of us stuck to our roots, kept it simple. Others, well, they found new ways to get ahead." The implication hung heavy in the air. A few people exchanged glances. Alyssa's smile widened. This was the dig she'd been waiting for. I guess what I'm saying, Ryan continued, is that success takes many forms. Some earn it the hard way, others meet the right people at the right time. The tension in the room thickened. Claire remained seated, her expression calm, but Nathan's hand rested lightly over hers in silent support. Ryan was about to wrap up when the committee chair, perhaps sensing the shift in tone, said into his own mic, "Thank you, Ryan. And now, why don't we hear from someone who's really been making waves since graduation? Claire Bennett." Applause broke out, genuine and warm. Ryan's smirk froze as Claire rose gracefully from her seat and took the stage. She stood at the podium, her posture poised, her voice steady. "Thank you. I wasn't expecting to speak tonight, but I suppose it's fitting. After all, this is a reunion, a time to reflect on where we've been and where we're going." She let her gaze sweep the crowd, making brief eye contact with familiar faces. "When I left high school, I thought success was about keeping life simple, staying safe, and for a long time, I lived that way. But life has a way of teaching you that comfort can be its own kind of cage." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. "I went through a time when I doubted myself completely," she continued. "When I believed I had nothing to offer and that my worth was tied to someone else's opinion of me. But the truth is, the moment you stop letting other people define your value, the world starts to open up in ways you couldn't imagine." She glanced toward Ryan briefly, not lingering, not glaring, just enough to make the subtext clear to anyone paying attention. "I built something for myself," she said. "Not because I met the right person, but because I became the right person. And yes, I've been lucky to have support along the way. But the work, the growth, that's mine." Applause began to swell, genuine and sustained. Claire smiled. "So to anyone here tonight who's ever been underestimated, don't waste energy proving people wrong. Spend it proving yourself right." The crowd erupted into cheers. She stepped down from the stage, Nathan meeting her halfway with an approving nod. Ryan stayed seated, clapping because it would look strange not to, but the applause felt like it was swallowing him whole. His attempt to undermine her had been turned into her most powerful moment of the night. When she returned to her table, Nathan leaned in and murmured something that made her laugh again, a sound that, to Ryan, felt like the final nail in the coffin of the image he'd tried to craft. From across the room, Alyssa whispered, "That didn't go how you thought it would, did it?" Ryan didn't answer. He just reached for his drink, the ice clinking louder than the music in his ears. And somewhere deep down, he knew this night wasn't over, and neither was the lesson he was about to learn. The energy in the ballroom shifted after Claire's speech. Conversations grew livelier, laughter flowed more easily, and everywhere Ryan looked, people were glancing toward her table with admiration. Ryan, however, sat rigid in his chair, swirling the last inch of scotch in his glass. He'd come here expecting to show her what she'd lost. Instead, she'd made him look like an afterthought. That gnawing feeling in his chest, the one he'd been trying to drown with charm, champagne, and Alyssa's constant chatter, was turning into something sharper. He wasn't going to leave tonight as the loser in his own story. Leaning toward Alyssa, he muttered, "Watch this." The committee chair was making his way back to the microphone to announce the last few items of the evening: a raffle, a group photo, a final toast. Ryan intercepted him with a smooth smile and a casual hand on the shoulder. "Mind if I say one more quick word, just to close things out?" The chair hesitated but eventually handed him the mic. Ryan strolled to the center of the stage, a confident smirk playing on his lips. "Before we wrap up," he began, "I just want to share a little something about what reunions are all about, remembering where we came from." The crowd quieted. Ryan scanned their faces before landing on Claire. "Now some of us," he continued, "have taken interesting paths, and it's important to remember that no matter where life takes you, your roots are your roots." He paused for effect. "I think most of you remember Claire back in the day, working in the library, always with her nose in a book. Simple, sweet, modest." There was a thin, uncomfortable laugh from a corner of the room. "And hey, nothing wrong with that," Ryan added, feigning innocence. "But I think it's easy to get caught up in appearances. Sometimes people forget who they really are when they get a taste of the high life. The subtext was unmistakable. The implication: Claire was only where she was because of Nathan. Claire sat perfectly still, her face unreadable. Nathan's jaw tightened slightly, but he made no move to interrupt. Ryan leaned casually on the podium. So I guess my point is, let's not forget that we're all just the same people we were back then, no matter what gowns we wear or who we sit next to. He ended with a self-satisfied smile, expecting at least a few approving chuckles. But the silence that followed was heavier than he anticipated. People shifted in their seats. A couple of them avoided looking at him altogether. Claire rose slowly from her chair. Nathan reached for her hand, but she shook her head gently and stepped forward. "May I?" she asked the committee chair, her voice calm. The mic was passed to her. She walked to the stage, the click of her heels the only sound in the room. Standing a few feet from Ryan, she faced the audience. "I'm glad Ryan brought up roots," she began, "because mine are something I'm deeply proud of. Yes, I worked in a library. Yes, I lived simply. I still read more than I watch TV, and I still prefer coffee shops to champagne bars." Her tone was warm but deliberate. "But those years taught me more than any paycheck or high-rise office ever could. They taught me to listen, to work hard, to treat people with kindness, whether they could do something for me or not." She glanced briefly at Ryan, then back at the crowd. "And for the record, nothing about the life I have now was handed to me. After my divorce, I started over with almost nothing. I worked 2 jobs while taking night classes in business and marketing. I built my company from scratch, without loans, without investors, without shortcuts, and last year we crossed our first million in revenue." There was a collective intake of breath. Even people who hadn't been following the conversation closely now leaned forward. She smiled faintly. "So yes, Nathan is my partner, and he's also one of my biggest supporters, but I was building my success long before we met. He didn't create me. He met me halfway." A ripple of applause began, growing louder as she stepped back from the mic. Then Nathan stood. His deep voice carried easily. "And in case anyone's curious," he said, "Claire's company recently secured a contract with one of mine. I'm proud to be working with her, not because of our relationship, but because she's damn good at what she does." The applause swelled again, this time punctuated by cheers. Ryan stood frozen, his smile stiff. The narrative had slipped entirely from his control. Claire handed the mic back to the chair and returned to her seat, her composure unshaken. Nathan reached for her hand, and she took it without hesitation. From his spot on stage, Ryan tried to salvage what little dignity he had left. "Well," he said awkwardly, "guess that's all the proof we need that our class produced some real go-getters." The chair quickly took back the mic, steering the program toward the raffle drawing. As Ryan stepped down, the difference in body language was stark. People who had been quick to shake his hand earlier now gave polite nods instead. Conversations shifted away from him, toward Claire's table. Alyssa tried to keep smiling, but her eyes darted nervously as if calculating the social damage. At the raffle, Claire won a gift basket of local wines. She accepted it graciously, thanked the donors, and sat back down. Ryan, meanwhile, won nothing. And the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone paying attention. The evening wound down with a group photo. Ryan stood several rows back while Claire and Nathan were positioned front and center. The photographer cracked a joke about our power couple, and the crowd laughed, not unkindly, but with a warmth that excluded Ryan entirely. As the photo was snapped, Ryan caught sight of Claire leaning into Nathan, smiling in a way he hadn't seen in years. It wasn't just happiness, it was freedom, and that was when it hit him. He hadn't just lost her, he'd lost the version of himself that she used to believe in. And in the quiet corner of his mind, a new fear crept in, that no matter what he did next, the rest of the night might only get worse for him. The raffle was over, the group photo taken, and the DJ had shifted to a mellow playlist of late 90s hits. Most guests were lingering at the dessert tables or in small clusters, swapping contact information and making plans to catch up soon, even though most never would. But Ryan wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. His pride, already bruised from the auction and Claire's speeches, was now dangling by a thread. Every time he glanced toward her table, he saw her laughing, engaged in animated conversation, Nathan's hand occasionally brushing hers in a way that looked completely natural. And every time, that thread frayed a little more. Alyssa had grown quieter as the evening went on. She was still physically beside him, but her attention kept drifting toward the people who weren't giving Ryan as much attention as they had earlier, toward the subtle shift in social gravity that now centered on Claire. Ryan's drink sat untouched in front of him. His jaw ached from clenching. He told himself he just wanted to set the record straight before the night ended. The truth was uglier. He couldn't stand the thought of her walking out of here with all the glory. That's when he remembered the photo. 2 years ago, not long after their divorce, he'd seen a social media post from someone in their old hometown. Claire had been back visiting her parents, wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, hair pulled into a messy bun, sitting at the cafe where they used to get breakfast. It wasn't a bad picture, just plain. To Ryan, it was proof that under all the polish, she was still that small-town girl who didn't belong in his world. He still had it saved. And now an idea began to form. Ryan excused himself, stepping into the hallway to pull up the image on his phone. He messaged it to the DJ with a fun little request. The DJ, too busy to question it, nodded and loaded the file into the projection system for the big screen. When Ryan returned to the ballroom, the DJ was already fading the music down. "Hey folks," the DJ said cheerfully. "Before we wrap up tonight, Ryan Mallory's got a little throwback surprise for everyone." Ryan strode to the center, microphone in hand. "You know, reunions are all about remembering where we came from," he said, forcing a chuckle. "And I just thought it'd be fun to share a little before and after moment." The screen flickered to life. First, it showed the professional photo of Claire from earlier in the evening, elegant, poised, emerald gown shimmering. Then it snapped to the cafe picture. Claire in faded jeans, hair messy, no makeup, sipping coffee from a paper cup. A few people laughed lightly, not cruelly, just in surprise. Ryan smiled wider, thinking he'd landed his punch. "See? No matter how far we go, we all start somewhere." But before the chuckles could settle, Claire stood. She didn't rush or look rattled. She simply walked toward the microphone with the same measured grace she'd carried all night. "Thank you, Ryan," she said evenly. "I actually love that photo. It was taken the day I signed the lease for my first office space. I'd been working 3 jobs for months to save up enough for the deposit. That coffee? It was my little celebration? And those jeans?" She smiled faintly. "Still have them. They remind me what I'm capable of when I decide I'm worth betting on." The murmurs in the crowd shifted instantly, from polite amusement to impressed recognition. Nathan rose from his seat, his voice carrying from across the room. "And for those keeping score, that office space is now a company valued in the millions. So yes, I'd say it was a good day to be in jeans." Laughter and applause broke out, not for Ryan's joke, but for Claire's story. Claire handed the mic back to Ryan with a polite, "Anything else you wanted to share?" For a split second, he just stood there, microphone heavy in his hand, the crowd's attention no longer on him, but on her. Alyssa shifted uncomfortably at their table. She looked at Ryan, then at Claire, then down at her drink. The message was clear. Whatever social points she'd hoped to gain from being here tonight, they weren't coming from him anymore. Ryan cleared his throat, muttered something about just having a little fun, and stepped off stage. The DJ restarted the music, but the energy had changed again. People began drifting toward Claire's table, not just to congratulate her, but to ask about her work, to exchange business cards, to invite her to future events. Ryan returned to his seat, the room around him buzzing in ways that had nothing to do with him. Alyssa gave him a thin smile, but didn't touch his arm. From across the room, Claire caught his eye for the briefest moment. There was no malice there, just the calm certainty of someone who knew the battle was over and had nothing left to prove. Nathan leaned in to whisper something in her ear, and she laughed, tipping her head toward him. The sight made something in Ryan's chest tighten painfully. For the first time all night, he wondered what would happen if he just left quietly. No goodbye, no final jab. But his pride wouldn't let him. Not yet. He sat back, telling himself he still had time to salvage his image, but deep down, a sinking realization was setting in. Every move he'd made tonight had only made her shine brighter. The cafe photo incident should have been Ryan's triumphant moment, his proof that beneath the polished exterior, Claire was still ordinary. Instead, it became the final push that vaulted her even higher in everyone's esteem. Now, as the DJ's music played on, Ryan could feel the air thinning around him. Not literally, but in the way people moved, how the circles of conversation seemed to subtly shift away from where he stood, leaving him at the fringes. Alyssa leaned closer, her perfume sweet but sharp. "You didn't tell me she had her own company," she said quietly. Ryan kept his eyes on his drink. "It's not a big deal. It's $1 million business, Ryan." Alyssa's voice carried a note of irritation. "And you brought me here like we were going to watch her squirm." His jaw tightened. "She's just good at selling a story." Half of what she said tonight was backed up by Nathan Cole in front of the whole room, Alyssa cut in. "Whatever you think of her, she's clearly winning tonight. And you." She trailed off, letting her eyes sweep over him before settling on the crowd gathered around Claire. "Are not." Before Ryan could respond, Alyssa rose, smoothing her dress. "I'm going to mingle." She didn't look back as she crossed the room, straight toward Claire's table. Ryan's stomach knotted as he watched Alyssa slip seamlessly into the group, laughing at something Nathan said, listening intently as Claire introduced her to a pair of influential alumni. It wasn't just betrayal, it was strategic. Alyssa was aligning herself with the new center of gravity in the room. Ryan's ears buzzed with the low hum of conversations that no longer included him. Then the committee chair tapped the mic. "Before we close, we'd like to invite everyone to join us in supporting a special cause tonight. Scholarships for young women in business, and we're thrilled to announce that one of our own alumni has offered a matching donation." A spotlight swung toward Claire's table. She rose, smiling modestly. "Thank you. This cause is close to my heart because I know what it's like to start with very little. For every dollar raised tonight, I'll match it personally, up to 100,000. Gasps and applause rippled through the crowd. Someone near the back shouted, "That's incredible." Claire glanced toward Ryan, not smugly, but with a look that was almost peaceful. "I believe in giving back," she said, "especially to people who just need someone to believe in them." Nathan stood beside her, adding, "And I'll match her match." The room erupted. What had been a pleasant fundraiser suddenly became electric with possibility. Alumni pledged from every corner, the numbers climbing rapidly. The atmosphere shifted from polite generosity to outright celebration. Ryan sat frozen, watching as the total surged past 200,000, then 3. His own earlier bid in the auction, which he thought was impressive, now looked like pocket change in comparison. The DJ played an upbeat track, the champagne flowed, and Claire moved effortlessly through the crowd, hugging old friends, thanking donors, laughing with ease. Nathan stayed close, but not possessively. It was clear she didn't need him to hold her place in this room. She commanded it herself. Alyssa drifted back to Ryan only long enough to murmur, "I'll grab a ride with friends." She didn't wait for his answer. Ryan felt the weight of every eye that wasn't on him. He'd arrived tonight expecting to be the one people talked about on the ride home. Now, he knew exactly what they'd be saying, how Claire had outshone him, how he'd tried to bring her down and only made her stronger. He drained the rest of his drink, but the burn in his throat couldn't drown out the quiet humiliation settling in his chest. The committee chair called everyone to the dance floor for the final song. Couples swayed under the soft lights, and Claire and Nathan joined them, her emerald gown catching the glow as they moved together. It wasn't just the way they looked, it was the way they fit, like two people who'd found solid ground in each other. Ryan lingered near the back, alone, pretending to check his phone. He caught glimpses of them between swaying bodies, her head tipping back in laughter, his hands steady at her waist. When the song ended, applause filled the room. The lights brightened, signaling the end of the evening. People began collecting coats and purses, saying their goodbyes. Claire and Nathan made their way toward the exit, stopping often to shake hands or exchange hugs. Ryan thought about intercepting them, maybe tossing out a final remark to save face. But something in the way they carried themselves, self-assured, unbothered, told him it wouldn't matter. Just before they reached the door, Claire looked back. For a brief second her gaze met his. There was no triumph in it, no gloating, just quiet finality. Then she turned away, stepping out into the cool night air with Nathan beside her. The ballroom emptied, leaving Ryan standing in the echo of his own miscalculations. And as the last guest left, he realized the night hadn't just been a loss, it had been a reckoning. By the next morning, the reunion was already all over social media. Photos and short video clips had flooded Facebook, Instagram, and even LinkedIn. There was the auction moment, Nathan coolly outbidding Ryan by a mile. There was Claire's speech about building her business from scratch, and most viral of all, there was the cafe photo twist. Ryan's attempt at a jab turned into Claire's triumphant origin story. The comments were relentless. Claire is goals. Ryan really tried it and failed spectacularly. That's how you handle shade, with class. Ryan sat in his kitchen, phone in hand, scrolling through the flood. Every refresh brought more posts, more tags, more people weighing in. Even people who hadn't been at the reunion were chiming in now, having seen the videos through mutual friends. His stomach turned when he saw Alyssa had posted a smiling selfie from the event, not with him, but with Claire and Nathan. The caption read, "An unforgettable night with inspiring people." There was no mention of Ryan. He dropped the phone onto the counter and rubbed his temples. By Monday, the fallout had crept into his professional life. At work, colleagues who had once been eager to share lunch or collaborate now offered only polite nods in the hallway. One coworker stopped by his office and with a smirk said, "Saw you went to the reunion. Looked eventful," then left without elaborating. Ryan told himself it was just temporary, that people would move on to the next gossip soon enough. But the truth was, the reunion had crystallized a narrative about him, and it wasn't one he could control. Meanwhile, Claire's name was everywhere. The local newspaper ran a short piece on the scholarship donations, highlighting her as an alumna making a difference. LinkedIn was buzzing with congratulatory messages on her company's growth. Even the old high school alumni page had posted a thank you to her for her generosity. On Wednesday, Ryan's mother called. "I saw the video of you and Claire," she said cautiously. He sighed. "Mom, she looked wonderful," his mother continued, "and she spoke so well. I didn't realize she'd built her own company." Ryan pinched the bridge of his nose. "Can we not talk about Claire?" There was a pause. "I just think maybe you should be proud of her." He ended the call soon after, unable to shake the sting in her voice. That evening, he spotted Alyssa's car in the parking lot of a popular downtown restaurant. Through the window, he saw her at a table, laughing with two people from the reunion, both of whom had been orbiting Claire all night. He realized, with a strange hollowness, that Alyssa wasn't avoiding him out of embarrassment. She'd simply found better company. Across town, Claire was sitting in her office. The reunion had brought a flood of new inquiries, potential clients, speaking invitations, even a couple of local TV segments wanting to feature her story. She'd accepted some, declined others, and stayed focused on her team. Nathan had stopped by earlier with coffee, kissing her cheek before heading to a meeting. "You know," he'd said, "what happened Friday night wasn't just a win for you. It was a masterclass for everyone in that room." Claire had smiled, but she didn't see it as a win. She saw it as a moment where she'd finally stepped into the person she'd been trying to become for years. Still, she couldn't deny a quiet satisfaction knowing Ryan's attempt to humiliate her had only made her stronger in the eyes of others. By Friday, exactly a week after the reunion, Ryan received an email from the reunion committee. It was a link to the official event gallery, along with a polite request for feedback on the evening. He clicked through the photos, faces smiling, champagne glasses raised, couples dancing. In nearly every candid shot, Claire looked radiant. Nathan stood beside her, both of them engaged in easy conversation with others. Ryan appeared in a handful of images, but in most, he was in the background, slightly apart from the group. It wasn't just the photos, it was the story they told. The room had belonged to Claire, and nothing he'd done could change that. Late that night, Ryan found himself scrolling through Claire's public LinkedIn profile. Her posts were professional but warm, celebrating her team's successes, thanking clients, sharing useful articles. Nowhere did she mention him, the reunion, or the drama. She didn't need to. The world had already filled in the blanks. He closed the laptop, the weight in his chest heavier than before. It wasn't just that he'd lost control of the narrative. It was that she hadn't even needed to fight him directly to win. Across town, Claire poured herself a glass of wine and sat on her balcony. The city lights stretched out below, the hum of traffic a distant murmur. She thought about the girl she'd been at the last reunion, nervous, eager to please, trying to prove she belonged. This time, she hadn't come to prove anything. She'd simply come as herself. And that had been enough. Nathan joined her, sliding into the chair beside hers. "You're quiet," he said. "Just thinking," she replied. "About him?" She shook her head. "About me, and how far I've come." Nathan smiled, lifting his glass. "To the journey, then." They clinked glasses, the sound crisp in the night air. Far across the city, Ryan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Every attempt to replay the reunion in his head only brought him back to the same image. Claire, standing under the ballroom lights, speaking with the kind of conviction he could never take credit for. And for the first time, he wondered if the shame he'd tried to give her was exactly what had freed her instead. 2 weeks after the reunion, Ryan was walking downtown, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of roasted coffee from the cafe on the corner. He hadn't been sleeping well. Too much time replaying moments from that night, each one cutting sharper than the last. He told himself he was over it, that the buzz around Claire would die down eventually. But everywhere he went, it seemed someone had seen the videos, or read the articles, or heard about that night. As he passed the glass storefront of a boutique, he caught sight of a familiar flash of emerald fabric. Not the same gown from the reunion, but a coat in a deep green shade that reminded him instantly of her. It was Claire. She was standing at the counter, paying for a small gift bag. Nathan wasn't with her. For a brief moment, Ryan considered walking away, but pride, or maybe curiosity, pulled him toward the door. The bell above it chimed as he stepped inside. Claire turned at the sound, her expression flickering briefly with surprise before settling into polite neutrality. "Ryan," she said. "Claire?" He nodded, trying to match her calm tone. "Shopping? Just picking up something for my assistant's birthday." She lifted the small bag slightly. There was a pause. The air between them waited but not hostile. "I wanted to say," Ryan began, then hesitated. "About the reunion. I wasn't trying to." He stopped himself. Lying now would be pointless. "I was trying to make you look small, and it didn't work." Claire's gaze didn't soften, but it didn't harden either. "No, it didn't." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Guess I underestimated you." "You didn't underestimate me," she said evenly. "You underestimated what happens when someone stops needing your approval." The words landed with the quiet finality of a closed door. Ryan shifted his weight. "Well, you looked happy that night. Genuinely happy." "I am," she replied simply. "Not because everything is perfect, but because I like who I've become. That's worth more than any ballroom victory." He nodded slowly, realizing she meant it. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't playing to the crowd. This was just her now. "I hope you find that for yourself someday," she added. For a moment, Ryan felt something unexpected, not humiliation, not jealousy, but a kind of aching clarity. She wasn't his to measure anymore. He cleared his throat. "Take care, Claire." "You too, Ryan." She stepped past him, the soft swish of her coat brushing his sleeve. Outside, the winter sunlight caught in her hair, turning it gold before she disappeared into the crowd. Ryan stood in the shop for a long moment before leaving. That night, Claire met Nathan for dinner at their favorite rooftop restaurant. The city stretched below, lights twinkling against the dark sky. She told him about the encounter, not as a dramatic story, but as a small note in her day. "He seemed different," she said. "Not much, but a little." "Maybe seeing you like that, untouchable, finally got through to him," Nathan said. "It's not about being untouchable," Claire replied. "It's about not letting someone else define your worth." Nathan reached across the table, taking her hand. "And you've mastered that." She smiled, squeezing his hand back. After dinner, they walked along the waterfront, the cold air biting at their cheeks. Claire thought about the girl she'd been years ago, standing at the edge of every room, hoping someone would notice her. Now, she stepped into every room, already knowing she belonged. And if the reunion had taught her anything, it was this. The best revenge isn't proving someone wrong. It's living in a way that makes their opinion irrelevant. Across town, Ryan sat in his apartment, scrolling through his phone. He stopped on a photo from the reunion. a candid shot someone had tagged him in. Claire was in the background, mid-laugh, Nathan's hand resting lightly at her back. She wasn't looking at the camera, wasn't posing. She was just happy. He closed the app, set the phone aside, and stared out the window at the city lights. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel the urge to win against her. He just felt the quiet truth of what she'd said. He needed to figure out who he was without measuring himself against her. Maybe someday he would. But for now, Claire's chapter in his story was closed. And somewhere, in a high-rise apartment filled with warmth and laughter, Claire was writing the next chapter of hers, one where she was the main character, not the supporting role in someone else's drama. And that, she realized, was the real victory all along. So that's it, my friends. The story has come to a close. And if you're still here with me right now, it means something in this journey has touched your heart in its own way. Maybe it's the reminder that, as Marcus Aurelius said, the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. Claire's victory wasn't about revenge. It was about self-worth, resilience, and living a life defined by your own standards, not someone else's opinion. In life, people will try to measure you by their yardstick. But like the Stoics teach us, we can't control their actions, only our response. So choose dignity over drama, growth over grudges, and purpose over pettiness. If this story resonated with you, give it a like, share it so someone else might find strength in it, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next journey we take together. Because your story, it's still being written.